Hey everyone, thanks for joining the show. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. It looks like Twitter's problems might be might be affecting the streams right now. It doesn't look like this is on Twitter, so I might have to. This is probably going to be a YouTube only show. But whoever's here, thanks for joining. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, my name, Yossi Goslin, and YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well for all my previous work. And make sure to subscribe to Third Apron newsletter on Substack. Today, I'm going to talk about the Portland Trailblazers, one of the teams that fell in the lottery like many others did. This is team 21 of 30 of my offseason preview. And joining me today to discuss one of the best guys covering the Blazers, Sean Highkin. Sean, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So as I'm looking at the Blazers roster, and they just completed year 3 of the rebuild. Year 4, year 4 being out of the lottery, they weren't necessarily like trying to rebuild in that first year before trading Dame. But zooming out and seeing the body of work, and especially seeing the step they made last year, I mean, how are you feeling like generally about how the work that they've done so far?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things positive to point to in this past year. They're really back up. So this is depending on how you wanna. I mean, because there are people that feel that they started rebuilding before they traded Dame. In terms of like there were a couple of those years there where they pulled, they shut guys down at the end of the season with injuries to try to maximize their lottery odds. But for our purposes, this was year 2 of the rebuild that they just did because they traded Dame in 2023. So there's been 2 seasons now post Dame, which I guess is kind of this current era.
Right.
The first year, the 23-24 season was a completely wasted year. All their guys pretty much were injured the whole year. I think so. The 5 guys, the stat that I kind of always point to with that is that you could say that the 5 most important guys that year were Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton. Those 5 guys played 4 games together that season because they were just all injured at different points. So you get through this season where they win 21 games, they get blown out by 60 points 2 different times, once in Oklahoma City and once in Miami, and they have so many injuries to different guys throughout the year that it's not even like they can at least look back and say, okay, we know these are some of our guys, we know these aren't our guys, we know, this is somebody we want to build with going forward. And then for all of that, they fall back 3 spots in the lottery from 4 to 7. So that was that year. This past year, I think they feel a lot better about where things at. And obviously the improvement in wins and the second half of the season, they went 23-18 for the final 41 games of the year. And kind of until the last week of the season, they were in the mix for the play-in. And which I don't think anybody really expected at the beginning of the season. And then you look at the development of some of their young guys, in particular Toumani Camara, who was just named to all defense yesterday, second team, and Denny Avdia, who they traded for last offseason, who was arguably their best player for a lot of the season. And then, you saw Scoot Henderson, after kind of a rough rookie season, took a little bit of a leap the second half of this season. And now, he's looking a lot more like, at the very minimum, he's going to be an NBA rotation player. Like, I think he's kind of shed the bust, talk or whatever at this point. And, you look at a lot of these different guys like Donovan Clingan, obviously kind of up and down as a rookie, but had some good moments, just made second team all rookie. They now are in a position where there's a handful of guys that you can look at and say, these are guys that you're comfortable if you're in a rebuild and you're trying to take the next step. These are guys that you're comfortable moving forward with. And I think they're also in a position now, especially, after that second half of the season where, again, they win 23 out of their last 41 games. And then, they extend Chauncey Billups, where I think until the end of the season, most people kind of thought that they were going to be doing a coaching search this offseason. They were going to move on from him. That obviously didn't end up happening. Him and Joe Cronin both got extensions at the end of the season. That now you kind of look at them and say, even if they wanted to tank again next year, I don't think they could, because they have too much actual NBA talent, and too many of their young guys have gotten too good that they're not going to be able to. This year it was Cooper Flagg. Next year, whether it's AJ DeBonsa, Cam Boozer, whoever, they're not going to be able to be, even if they were to want to, they're not going to be able to be one of the teams that is in the Utah, Washington, Charlotte, whoever you want to put in that group of teams that we can even say in May are going to be going for that next year. The Blazers, I think, at this point are not going to be doing that. And, Joe Cronin said at the end of the season in his press conference that they don't want to be in the lottery next year. They don't want their season to end on, that day in mid-April next year. So I think at the very least, they're going to hope to be in the play-in, depending on obviously how this offseason goes and, what they're able to do as far as trades, what they end up doing in the draft next month. But I think they're in a position where they're not trying to be bad on purpose anymore, which I think is a little bit of a step forward.
Yeah, and they showed that this year. You could have made a good argument that if this was a good year of any to try to be bad one more time, but they made a big push.
That was the plan.
Yeah, they made a big push. Like I felt for a while around like late February, early March that they were gonna make the play-in, just seeing how the Mavs and the Suns and the Kings were imploding. They didn't get quite there, but they were pretty close. But but you said it. You're absolutely correct. Like, even if they wanted to, they're not going to want to. Typically, teams when they're entering like a full scale rebuild, they don't really want to do more than like 3 years.
Right.
And they basically did the 3 years this year. That unexpectedly kind of became that push year where they're trying to see what they've got and try to make a leap forward. So as far as how I feel they did, I'm a little more mixed on the rebuild because ultimately, like when you look at the result, I think, especially seeing who developed this year, they clearly have like almost like 80%, 85% of their core done, and which is huge. That like, however they got to this result, like at least they got here. But I just felt they could have done a little bit better, and you could feel free to push back if you disagree. But like, they held on to Dame a little too long. Granted, that's mainly the previous regime that this front office they didn't. So that's not really their fault, but I obviously like there was like probably a better window back then to trade him. Same thing kind of, but then like they kind of keep getting these players on big contracts, and the idea is hopefully they will have some better trade value than having cap flexibility instead. So instead of having cap flexibility to maybe take on more bad money with some draft picks, they didn't really get more draft picks. So it could have been a little better, I think, if they went that a little more like in on the rebuild and trying to use their cap flexibility, get a little more assets. But like ultimately, it's hard to really argue with what they've done because at the end, they've got now two really good forwards in Avdia and Toumani Camara, who unexpectedly is the prize of the Dame return, it seems.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah. And I suppose Denny too, because they got one of the picks that they then turned it. Well, two of the picks they flipped them for Denny
and Brogdon, who they got in the Drew trade, which was an offshoot of the Dame trade. So technically, yeah, pretty much all the assets that they used on the Denny trade were part of the Drew trade, which was an extension of the Dame trade. So you can make the argument if you want to that their two best players, that are the two guys that you feel the most sure about going forward, are both guys that they got as a result of the Dame trade.
Yeah, They didn't prioritize getting extra draft picks. They wanted players that can help. They did a good job.
That's been their approach, yeah.
And especially with Denny, they really did a good job identifying, hey, we think this guy can be, a huge part of our core. And right now he's their best player. Hopefully they can get someone better to be their best player, and we'll get to that later. Maybe Denny could be an A1 guy. I kind of doubt he can be like a great first option on a great team, but and we'll get to that a little later. But and then you just look. Then the other thing is just mainly the guard, because they're set. I think they're pretty set at center. Like when you have Klingon, he's going to be an excellent rim protector. You got him on the rookie deal for the next 3 years. I don't think you really need to do too much more there at center, other than just having like a solid backup. Now, just the biggest TBD is can Scoot make. Get a little closer to what he was projected to be. I think Sharpe, he's pretty legit. I think he's going to get a pretty nice extension this summer. So for the most part, they kind of have like the wings set up and center. So as far as I'm just kind of the question now. I mean, like, how good can this team be? I'm trying to figure. That's what I'm trying to wonder. Like, and then like how does adding like an additional best player, whether it's like another forward, there's a lot of speculation about them going after some of the best forwards available. Maybe they could go after a point guard if they don't think Scoot's gonna pan out, but I think they're still gonna give him like another year.
I would agree. Yeah.
I mean, like, what are you feeling is like some of their higher end outcomes once that they are ready to like go and compete for a playoff spot?
It's so funny that you bring, you kind of just went through all of the positions. And I've been saying that, like, their biggest areas of need are kind of everything and nothing at the same time. Because, like, the thing what they don't have, I think the one thing they don't have that I think they need to to really take the next step is whoever the guy is. Now, obviously, if they had gotten the Mavs luck in the lottery and gotten Cooper Flagg, then obviously that would take care of that. And that would have been kind of a perfect situation to plug him into, because once you have, the guy, it's not going to be like, it wouldn't be like San Antonio the year they drafted Wemby and they basically had no NBA players around him. They would have kind of be able to plug a guy like that into a team that's already like pretty good as far as the supporting guys. So they kind of have everything except for the guy, whoever that guy is. And obviously, in order to be a contender on the level that, you look at the teams that are still left in the playoffs, Minnesota has Anthony Edwards. Indiana has Tyrese Halliburton. Oklahoma City has SGA. They all have kind of that guy. And even some of the guys that are the teams that are like a little bit lower down in the food chain, but are still kind of where they hope to be. Like, I think Paolo Banchero is better than anybody that's on the Blazers right now. I think that Cade Cunningham is better than anybody that's currently on the Blazers roster. So they need like that level of guy. And I think they kind of, Joe and Chauncey both at their end of year press conference kind of left the door open for somebody, whether it's Shaedon Sharpe or Toumani Camara or Denny Avdia, to develop into that guy kind of unexpectedly, the way that, I don't think anybody thought SGA was going to be an MVP when he first came into the league, or else he wouldn't have gone 11th overall. And everybody always talks about like Jokic was a second round pick, Giannis was not a lottery pick. To me, it's like, you can say that, but like you can say that about like any teams, like young players that have, upside. And you say, well, Giannis was not a lottery pick and he turned into a 2-time MVP and a finals MVP and Hall of Famer. I don't think that's a thing that you can count on happening. I do think that Avdia and Kamara both have still a level better that they can get, as good as they are right now. But I would agree with you that I don't think it's fair to really put it on them or bank on it that those two guys are going to become like the guy. So they need to figure out how to get that guy. But when you talk about their positions of need, you kind of just went through it. Like, okay, Scoot Henderson, point guard, they still, they're happy with his development in his second year, especially the second half of the year. Shaedon Sharpe, definitely took a step forward the second half of the year. They're, they like him. And, to your point earlier, they're going to be extension talks this summer. I don't know whether something's going to get done or not, but that's certainly going to be something that'll be on the table in some form. Denny Avdia, they just traded for. They love him. He's definitely a core piece. Toumani Camara just made second team all defense. He's definitely a core piece. Donovan Clingan, their lottery pick last year. Obviously, they're showed what he is as a rim protector. Needs to get a lot better offensively, but as a defender, like, he's good enough defensively that he's going to be a 10 or 12 year rotation player in the NBA. So they have a lot of, like, they kind of quietly have a guy at least or more at every position. And then, you still have DeAndre Ayton at least for one more year. You still have Anthony Simons at least for one more year. You have like these other, you have this, like, you quietly it kind of makes their draft choice, if they do keep the 11th pick, which at this point, I think unless the perfect deal comes along, I would still expect them to take somebody at 11 instead of trying to trade out. It kind of makes the decision easy because it's not like there's an obvious area of need where it's like, oh, you have to take this guy. Like last year, the Blazers were, I think, the second or worst rim protection team in the league. And so when Donovan Clingan, who's the best rim protector in college basketball, was on the board at 7, that's an obvious guy to take. Like, that made that whole thing pretty easy. This year, they don't have the guy. They don't have whoever the number one guy is going to be. But they are kind of sneaky deep at most of the positions, at least as far as like having at least one good player. So you kind of just take whoever you think the best player is on the board and just figure out the fit later. And that also works with, some of these trades that they might be trying to do this summer. You kind of, because you don't have one area where it's like, well, this is the obvious area of weakness, you just try to get the best player you can at whatever position and then try to figure out how everything else fits around them.
As far as who can potentially be that like candidate of who, if there's anyone on the roster that can internally become the guy, I think at this point you're hoping it's Scoot, which I wouldn't rule out completely yet. I think this is gonna be like probably the year that we'll know for sure, because if he actually panned out the way everyone expected, then like that's it. They're set. Like there's not really that many questions,
right?
Because I think they have a good enough core to make the rest work. So that's just the biggest question mark. Because I'm sure there's gonna be at some point, like I think that it could be an interesting guard market over the next year. If that might be where they might have to do something if he doesn't quite reach a level. But let's see. He still has another chance. So let's get into the actual offseason a little bit, because as I'm looking at, they already have a full roster. They have a little bit more flexibility this year than they've had in previous years, where they were like right up against the tax. They're about like 11 million. So they have some room to spend if they want to bring in a mid-level guy. I think more so, I would guess that they're going to keep that flexibility for potential trades. Because they can, use the bigger trade exceptions in the new CBA to increase the payroll. So, as I explained earlier, one of my biggest criticisms of the rebuild was just taking on all these big contracts, and they've been just stuck with them, with mainly like Aiden Grant, Tybal, Robert Williams. Now all those guys are expiring contracts, all of them. So now they've got a lot of flexibility to play with, and even if they don't do something with that right now, I project them to have like 80 million in cap space next summer. Now it'll probably be a little less than that. That doesn't factor in whatever Sharpe's extension will come out, but they're gonna have a lot of flexibility. Most likely, that kind of seems to me like that between now and the next year or so, that's what they'll probably use that time to use up their flexibility in some type of trade, whether it's like a consolidation trade or even just to deepen the roster. Because cap space, one, it's not really like the Blazers are never really been like a cap space destination, but also now teams aren't really counting on cap space. Too many players skip free agency now. They're all extending. So yeah, that's what I'm keeping an eye on, because like as I look at the roster, it feels like they're ready to do something. Like they've got all these guys that they're like top 5-6 guys, but then they've got like these 3 other guys, mainly like Aiden Grant, Simons, that are like their 3 highest paid players. I'm not sure exactly, like at least like Aiden Grant, they don't really, they're not going to be a part of the next great team, but like Simons, okay, maybe he could still be a part of that. But they've got a lot of expiring contracts to play with. So as I see like what they're going to do this summer, it feels like they're going to be like a sneaky player to go after one of the top available all-stars. And I'm not sure it really matters too much what position that player is right now. But that's just what it like screams to me. And especially they have like most of their draft picks going forward. They still owe one, a lottery protected one to the Bulls from the Nance trade, but they still have an extra 2029 first because they had 2 extra ones, one from the Celtics, one from the Bucks. They have like an additional extra there. They have their 11th pick this year. So they definitely have the stuff and the flexibility to do something. I'm just curious what that might be.
They have swaps with Milwaukee in 28 and 30 too from the Dame trade.
Yeah, they have those two.
So those are looking like they might be pretty good.
Yeah, and especially maybe could make Portland a facilitator in a Giannis trade. Not that they would get Giannis. I would be surprised, but like they could maybe turn those picks into help getting someone else that that they might be targeting.
Totally. No, that's the Giannis thing, I think is really the wild card in the Blazers offseason. I agree with your assessment exactly. I don't think realistically they would be a team that would try to trade for Giannis because I don't think they have enough, even with all the assets that you listed. I don't think they have enough to compete with, a Houston or an Oklahoma City or whatever team and is actually going to be in the mix for Giannis. San Antonio. And I also don't think this is a place where Giannis necessarily is going to look at and say, oh, I want to go here. This is where I want to go. I don't think that's So I don't think they're a Giannis team. But if you're the Bucks, you're trading Giannis. They don't control any of their, you know this off the top of your head better than I do. I think they don't control any of their picks until what, 2031, 2032?
Yeah, no, you got it. It's 2031.
So New Orleans has their picks the next 3 years, or 26 and 27 this year, and then 26 and 27, and the Blazers control their picks in 28, 29, and 30. So whether it's New Orleans or Portland, one of those two teams could very easily jump into a Giannis trade. And whoever, like, let's say hypothetically, it's like we've heard about Orlando kind of as a team that might make a play for Giannis. And if you're Orlando and you look at kind of the stuff they have, you would think that the piece that would have to go back in that trade would be probably Franz, right? Because that's not a guy that Orlando would trade under normal circumstances, but if it's for Giannis, you have to think about it, right? So if you're Portland, let's say that was like the framework of the trade. If you're Portland, or put in whoever you want to put in from the other team. Like, let's say it's Oklahoma City and the piece that's going back is Jalen Williams, or if it's Houston and it's Amen Thompson, whatever it is, whoever like the main young piece is that's like that might be looked at as we talked about the Blazers needing the guy for this rebuild. Whoever is a young guy that could be that piece, they could go to Milwaukee and say, hey, we have your picks those 3 years. We'll give you your picks back, control of your picks back, so you can actually, have your future back and control your rebuild. You give us the player, whoever that may be, if it's one of those types of guys that is like a guy that could be plugged in as part of a core of a team like the Blazers that's ready to take the next step. That's a thing I think they could really look at if. And by the way, this is all contingent on Giannis actually asking for a trade, because as we're recording this, Giannis has not yet actually asked for a trade. We all kind of assume it's coming, but it kind of reminds me of like all the years covering, the Dame will he, won't he stuff. Until you hear it from him, it's not real. It's all just speculation. And then you do hear it from him, and now it's real. So we still haven't gotten to the place yet with Giannis where it's from him and he has actually told the Bucks, I want to be traded. So this is all very hypothetical for right now. But obviously all the reasons are there on paper for him to, this to be the right time for him and the Bucks to move on, because they just don't really have any avenues to get better. And now obviously Dame has the Achilles injury, so he's not going to play probably at all next year. So on paper, it makes a lot of sense. But again, until it comes from Giannis, we can't assume that that's going to happen. But if it does, the Blazers, I think, are very well positioned to, they have, all those expiring contracts that you mentioned. They can make the salaries match on whoever. And they have those Bucks picks that I think the Bucks would probably have a lot of interest in getting control back of, as opposed to like, let's say the Bucks were to trade him to Oklahoma City and Jalen Williams is the player that you're going to get back. You have to, Jalen Williams is about to be extension eligible. A team that's like starting a rebuild like the Bucks, if you're trading Giannis, what are you going to be doing paying Jalen Williams a max contract to be on a rebuilding team? A team like Portland, and I'm not even saying specifically that Jalen Williams is a player they're interested in. Obviously, he's really good, and I think he'd fit well on this team, but I'm just saying like the type of guy that would be a centerpiece of a Giannis trade. It would make more sense for a team like the Blazers to be in a position to want to pay him what he should, would want to get paid than it would be for a team like the Bucks. So there could be something to be worked out there with, again, we'll give you your picks back, you give us the player, is kind of the negotiations that they could have there with the Bucks, which is kind of, it's kind of the blueprint of like what Brooklyn and Houston did this summer, where Brooklyn got their picks back so they could rebuild, and Houston wanted like all of Phoenix's picks, because if they're ever in a position to trade for Devin Booker, they can say, hey, we can give you your future back and kind of bail you out of this position that you put yourself in. That's kind of where the Blazers, and to also the Pelicans, if they wanted to get involved in there too, that's where these two teams kind of find themselves. So I think that's really if you want to talk about how Portland can add like a real impact guy who could be like the quote unquote, the guy, which they don't have. I think getting involved as the third party in a Giannis trade and trying to peel off whatever the main asset is that would have been going to Milwaukee and giving them their picks back is probably the most likely way that they would be able to do that.
So I've put some thought into how the Bucks might want to get some of their picks back. And like there's a lot of speculation about the Bucks, they want to stay good next year because of their draft pick situation, but like I don't see any any path where they can like be anything but bottom 10 next year. Like assuming they trade Giannis. And because if like assuming Giannis is gone, okay, you can bring in like 2 or 3 guys that are effective, but like you've got $50 million in dead money, unfortunately, and with Lillard since he's not going to play, and the rest of the roster, it's it's so uninspiring. I wouldn't expect Brook Lopez to return if Giannis leaves and Dame's not playing. So I think the Bucks will probably want some of their picks back, but I get the feeling the priority might be the sooner ones. So the
New Orleans
Pelicans,
ones.
yeah. So I kind of think like I'm looking at New Orleans right now as a facilitator first because I think the Bucks more pressingly might need the 26 swap to be extinguished, and then they're 27. It's kind of complicated. Like the Bucks still, the Pelicans still kind of have a stake in it, but it's mostly the Hawks now have it. They got it from the DeJounte Murray trade. So
Right.
I get the feeling like first the Bucks are going to prioritize getting those back. I think where the Blazers could come in is maybe like a couple years from now. So let's say the Bucks, they do some trade with the Pelicans and Hawks. They get their own picks back. Maybe they get like a lottery pick this year. So now it's like they have this draft and the next 2 to get some guys and see what they can do. And then by then Dame's contract is done. If things still aren't looking too good, okay, maybe they can talk to the Blazers and there's something they could do. So I think though the Blazers could still do something to get a guy, to get another guy to do some sort of consolidation if that's what they want. Aiden, for the most part, just probably neutral value, just like a very nice big expiring salary.
Yeah.
Simons though, even though he's expiring, he's got a good amount of value. I think. You mentioned Orlando as a potential. Like I could see them going after.
That's
Giannis,
the one that that's like everybody's favorite trade machine team for Simons. And by the way, I don't think it's necessarily like you talk about like these veterans that they have that kind of don't fit the timeline. To me, the one that you kind of have to figure something out with this summer is Jeremy Grant. He's the one that like, because even like Anthony Simons, like theoretically you would think Scoot and Shaden are the 2 guards of the future, but the Blazers don't really have anybody that can shoot or create for themselves except for Anthony Simons. So I think he still does have a skill set that they don't really have anywhere else on the roster. And so, if he wanted to, hang on to him and even potentially extend him, if they can get him to extend at maybe a lower number than what he's on right now, that is something I could see them, looking at. I don't think it's like a guarantee that they're going to be shopping Simons this summer. And even DeAndre Ayton, like obviously Klingon is their guy, is their center of the future, but he's not going to play 48 minutes. And with Robert Williams' health being what it is, you can't really ever count on him being available. I think if DeAndre Ayton was making half as much money as he's making right now on that kind of on that max contract that he signed, with the offer sheet he signed with the Pacers that the Suns matched, I don't think anybody would have a problem. Like, I think most of DeAndre Ayton's like reputation and, the way he's kind of talked about around the league is based on how much money he makes. So that's even a guy potentially that like, if you wanted to hang on to him with the understanding that Klingon is going to be your guy going forward, you could do a whole lot worse as a rotation because like Ayton, for all the, the talk of what he is compared to what he was where he was drafted and, what he's getting paid. He's not Yusuf Nurkic. Like he is still a starting caliber center on an NBA team. He's not, he's not dead money. He's
if
still
he was making like 10 million less, I think the conversation on Aiden would be way different.
Absolutely. I think absolutely. But the one that clearly to me does not fit with anything that they're doing is Jeremy Grant, because as we've talked about, the 2, to me, most sure thing guys on their roster going forward are the 2 forwards, Toumani Camara and Deni Avdija. Both of those guys have to start. Like you can't. There's no way you could really justify based on merit. Like, Toumani is going to come off the bench because Jeremy Grant is still here and he has to start. Or you could bring Jeremy Grant off the bench, but A, is Jeremy Grant going to want that, and B, how much sense does it make to have a guy making $32 million coming off the bench? So to me, that's the one that like, just from a fit standpoint, they've got to figure something out with him. And I don't know, what the team is that, is going to look at him and say, this is something we want to actually give up value for. Jeremy, he had a down year this year for sure. He's still, I don't think he's like And I think he's still like a rotation player in the NBA. It's just that it's a lot of money and it's a lot of years left, and I don't know what the market is necessarily going to be for him this summer, but that's the one to me. If you were prioritizing trading one of those guys from a fit standpoint, to me, clearly that's the one that you got to, do something with.
Unfortunately, like I doubt there will be a market for Grant at the moment. He barely played in the later stretch of the year. I mean, I think he kind of stopped playing early March or something, and
he hasn't played post March 12th since the bubble.
Yeah, I saw that stat. He's like Mr. Not April, apparently. Like, just never plays in April. And
because he's just the team, whether it was Detroit the first couple of years that he was there or the 3 years he's been here, they've just by the end of the season, they're just shutting guys down to tank, and he's just not.
Yeah.
It's a nice gig if you can get it.
So he's going to need to, play a little better, which he will. I'm sure he's not going to continue playing. He struggled this year. He's going to bounce back. And then after that, the contract gets a little shorter. I would say at the earliest, a trade deadline, maybe they might have something for him. But as far as like what they could use to go after someone, so I mentioned Simons just because I think he's got some value first, and as an he's expiring. Like, they got to make a decision on him soon. He's got he has this extension he can do that would take him into like 30, I think like 33 to 35 million average. Do they want to? Are they going to be willing? Are they going to be comfortable paying him that? Knowing, if Scoot pans out, they're going to have to pay him a lot of money. So, and a lot of guys are about to get paid. So it's so like the Magic, they're a team that have been reported to be interested in him. But usually when people do their trade machine stuff, usually people just want to do 2-team trades. And I don't think the Blazers are interested in like Cole Anthony, some other expiring contract, and a first-round pick. I don't think that's what the Blazers are going to be looking for. So
if they were interested in that, they probably could have done that already.
Exactly. So that's where, like, if they're going to go after somebody, maybe like another forward that they can add to the rotation, or potentially a better guard in case Scoot doesn't become like that starting level guy they need, then you can use Simons as some of the value. You can use Aiden or Robert Williams or Tybalt to help make the money work, so whatever combination needed. They got the 11th pick. They have that additional 29 first. So they have like De'Ron and one of Milwaukee's, Boston's, whichever they end up keeping in the future. So they've got stuff. I think that's like actually a pretty like acceptable package for some of the guys that they've been speculated about. Like, I've seen a lot of people speculate, why don't the Blazers go after like Zion Williamson or Lauri Markkanen, like bring in another forward. And I kind of like the idea of them bringing in a guy like that, like especially Zion. If he can really be your number one guy, and he's got that non-guaranteed contract. So if things don't work out, you've got an out. So so I just look at this stuff. It might not seem that appetizing, but like, I think that's kind of what they're going to go for. Just not trading all their picks, but like some combination of them. Maybe those Bucks picks, those swaps will come into play too to get that guy. So yeah, I feel like they're going to be able to convert on some of this combination of stuff in like a multi-team trade and get somebody. Just a matter of who. And I guess we still have some time for that. Maybe when we get closer to the draft, we'll know.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, and kind of the way that the thing that I always kind of caution people this time of year is the trades that actually happen are not the ones you hear about. Like, I had no clue that Denny Avdia was even on the table or was available, or that was even like when I was kind of going through last offseason and thinking like, oh, who could they trade for? Who are the trade targets? It never occurred to me that Denny Avdia could be traded or that Washington would even make him available. And then when I saw that trade happened, it was like, oh, wow, okay, they kept that one quiet. Like that, and even like on a much bigger scale during the whole Dame, summer where he requested a trade and he made it very clear that he only wanted to go to one team and the Blazers didn't really want to trade him there. And so you were kind of thinking about like what the other teams are that could get involved. And it's like there was some rumors about Toronto at one point. There were rumors about like different teams. When the news broke that they were trading him to Milwaukee, that was not something that was really on my radar at all. That was not really something that was on anybody's radar. So the stuff they actually do, and this is true around the league, the stuff that the stuff that actually happens is not the stuff that you kind of hear about, which makes me think that like if they do end up trading Anthony Simons, it might not be to Orlando just because everybody has been talking for like 4 years about Orlando is the team that should trade for him. I mean, I think just because of that, like you're not like they might be, if they trade him, it could be somewhere else, or it could,
or mostly to get other parts that not coming from Orlando. I think totally, that's most likely.
That's the thing. It's like really easy for people to just kind of plug stuff into a trade machine and say, okay, this makes sense. But the stuff that actually happens, the teams that are discussing it, like, did we really think like Donovan Mitchell was going to get traded to Cleveland until it happened? Like everybody was all New York, New York, New York. Like, it's never the stuff that either gets leaked, like that they've had talks, or the rumors, or everybody thinks this makes sense. That's never the thing that actually happens.
And it's especially true with Portland. Like, nobody saw Dame to Milwaukee at all till the moment that happened. So Denny as well. So I'm sure they're up to something. I'm sure they're looking at some guys. Maybe it's even like someone like Denny. They brought him in fresh off his rookie scale contract ending. Maybe there's like a young guy that he's like still in his rookie contract that we don't even know might be available, and maybe that's who they make their push. Maybe a guy that they heavily scouted over the past 3 years couldn't get him, and maybe he'll be up for grabs. Like, no, it's a good point. I think I'm not saying they'll do something this offseason, maybe it's something in the trade deadline, but I would imagine before they head into next offseason where they have all this flexibility, I think they're going to want to have used it by then, because most likely not really going to have that much to do with cap space in 2026, other than, I guess you could make an inbounds trade then. But if you can get something for your players now, before they expire, before you got to make a decision on them, you might as well do that. I made a fun, I was kind of building out the Blazers roster just because, they have all this flexibility next year where, they're gonna, you've got Avdia and Klingon making just very little, Avdia's making the mid-level, Klingon's on his rookie deal. Like that's just going to help them so much over the next few years. You still have 2 years of Scoot on his rookie deal. So you're going to pay Sharpe. I think he'll get something maybe get something in the mid 20 million, something like that. And that would make him the highest paid player on the Blazers next year. Right under Grant.
Yeah.
Basically, what I want to get to. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I have no feel for what the Shaedon extension value is going to be. I think mid 20s is kind of a good, ballpark of, personally where I'd put it, because, he did have a really good second half of this year. He also, his second year, he only played 32 games because of the core muscle surgery. So it's he has shown a lot in this half season, but it's also just not a very big sample size of it's not like some of these other young guys that have gotten these big extensions, where you're just you kind of look at you look at a Jalen Suggs extension, or a Jalen Johnson in Atlanta, some of those. Has Shaedon shown as much as those guys? Has he? I don't know. Has he? Maybe you can make the argument either way.
The reason Keith Smith on Spotrac, he did his Blazers offseason, and before I read it, I'm like, what is Shaedon's extension going to look like? And he basically put the Trey Murphy contract as a comparison, where Trey Murphy was selected a lot lower than Sharpe. I think that actually kind of makes sense, as far as you have that comp already from last year. I would imagine that might be some kind of reasonable meeting points for both teams. Especially if the Blazers believe he's still got some a couple more steps to make. So I think it's gonna, it's tough to gauge what it is, but I think that's a good starting point to see where things might go. But the point I'm getting at is that they're gonna pay him. They have the option to pay Kamara early. They can give him a raise, which in that case, okay, maybe instead of giving him the max amount that he can get in that extension, for getting paid a little early, maybe takes a little bit of a discount. And they can pay all these guys, and they can still have Jeremy Grant on their books potentially not starting, coming off the bench as their highest paid player. I just bring that up. Yeah, that's not going to be the goal. I think they would like to move him at this point. But in case things don't work out, they have so much flexibility, assuming they have already done so. And this is if they've already also traded like a combination of Aiden and Simons, brought in like another max guy. You can still have Grant there and just kind of wait to see how the market unfolds and not be worried about like what the crossing the tax or anything like that. So it's just interesting because that they're in this spot, because I think in the past years they kind of been like in cap hell, and now they're about to have such a very strong cap sheet going forward. Where Grant's deal, if he continues like this, it's going to be one of the most toxic deals, and if he doesn't play better. But they'll be okay to hold on to it and just see how he plays out. Hopefully, not rush to move him and potentially have to give up something to get off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're just in a great spot. It worked out in the end. It seemed like earlier the past few years I was a little concerned. I wasn't sure where this was going, but like they seem to have landed the ship pretty well.
I mean, we'll see. I think you're putting a lot on the fact that they went 23 and 18 in the second half of the season. It's really, you're kind of basing a lot on, and I do think a lot of their, improvement is legit. I think that, obviously Toumani Camara just made all defense, like as a second year player who's not like, who wasn't like who was a second round pick. Like that's, him and Avdia, and like a lot of the improvement was legit, but you're also, the thing I would be worried about, and it's kind of a different front office regime. Joe Cronin was in the front office at this time, but he was not the decision maker. But remember about 10 years ago in the 2015-16 season. So that's previous summer in 2015.
I remember very well.
LaMarcus leaves. He goes to San Antonio. They trade Batum. Wes Matthews leaves. Their plan is to tank because Dame is in like his third or fourth year at that point. The plan is to tank and just go young and rebuild around Dame. Dame is too good for them to tank. They end up making the playoffs. And then they get really lucky in the first round and they play the Clippers when Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and JJ Redick all get hurt. So like the Clippers basically are a skeleton crew and the Blazers win that series. And then the second round, they play the 73-win Warriors, but Steph is still coming back from that injury he had in the first round. And so they lose in 5, but it's like a competitive 5 games. And so they had this, better than expected, playoff success. But a lot of it was because they had this like crazy injury luck. And what they should have done then is say, okay, we're better than expected. We're not a bottoming out, like tanking, trying to get the number 1 pick team. Let's just kind of incrementally, let's just keep adding to this group and get some more guys that make sense. What do they do that summer instead? Of course, the cap spike summer. They sign, Evan Turner, Alan Crabb, Myers Leonard, like to that extension. Festus Ezeli, who never played a game in the NBA again after he signed that deal. Like they just completely, and every team that summer kind of lost their minds with some of those contracts that were handed out. But the Blazers were one of the most egregious teams of that, and they basically just completely capped their ceiling with Dame in that summer. If I were them, and I from what I've heard, from what people I've talked to in the organization, I think they're mindful of this. They don't want to go into this offseason and say, well, we almost made the play-in. We were a lot better than expected. Let's, trade 4 first-round picks and, use all of our cap space and, get, whoever, whatever player. And, like, let's really try to go for it. And then you end up as, like, a perpetual, play-in team for the next 5 years again. And you're right back where you were for all those years with Dame. I think they're very, especially with this new CBA, I think they're pretty mindful of not wanting to do that. And the other thing, and this hasn't come up yet, but we found out about a week and a half ago that the team's for sale. Like that's a thing now. That's been something that people have been wondering when was going to happen for 7 years since Paul Allen died in 2018. And since then, it's been his sister, Jody, that's been the trustee of his estate. So she's been like the de facto owner, but the team is actually in a trust. And there's just kind of been this, when are they going to sell the team? When are they going to sell the team? Phil Knight obviously very publicly tried to buy the team 3 years ago. They turned him down. That turned into a whole thing. They announced last week that they are starting the formal process of putting the team up for sale. So that's kind of hovering over all of this too, because you don't know who's going to buy the team, what their philosophy is going to be, how much they want to kind of, when whoever buys the team comes in and puts the, wants to, make, a bunch of big changes or make a big splash. Like you look at what Matt Ishbia did when he bought the Suns a few years ago. I think like 24 hours after the sale closed and he took over as the principal owner of the team, he greenlit that Kevin Durant trade. Or, you look at kind of just, the Timberwolves, like Mark Lowry and A-Rod kind of start, obviously that ended up being a whole thing, but like with the, the back and forth between them and Glenn Taylor and the arbitration and all that. But like they start, they take over, they make a big splash and hire Tim Connolly away from Denver as their president of basketball operations. And then they make that huge all-in trade to get Rudy Gobert. Whoever the new Blazers owner is, are they going to come in and at least for the first year look at it and say, yeah, you guys are kind of on a good, track. Let's just kind of keep this going. You don't want to really rock the boat too much the way that, or are they going to say, because, Joe Cronin and Chauncey Billups both got extensions at the end of last season. So you would think right now they've got some job security, but
yes.
What if a new owner, it's always very possible that a new owner could come in 9 to 12 months from now, which is when I think the team is going to be sold, and say, you know what? I want to bring in all my own people. I want a clean house. I want to start over. And then everything we've talked about as far as like what this front office's philosophy is and, how they've gone about building this team, that could all go out the window because they could bring somebody else in. But they could someone also could buy the team, look at it and say, I like where this is headed. The Joe and Chauncey seem like they have a good thing going. Let's just ride this out for another couple of years. Like it genuinely could go either way. And I have no idea at this point who is or isn't interested in buying the team.
Yeah, I understand the apprehension with like the uncertainty of ownership taken over because what just happened with the Suns and Mavs under their watch. So I understand that. You brought up a good point though that Cronin and Billups strategically both got extensions before it was even announced that there's going to be a sale. So I would imagine, first of all, we don't even know how soon a sale. I mean, do you have an idea of when it's going to be? Like something soon or like maybe a year or something?
Think roughly, like obviously it'll get done when it gets done, but the rough timeline that I've kind of been told is like reasonable to expect is 9 to 12 months. So like roughly around what because remember it just took the Celtics 9 months to sell. They announced on July 1st last year that the team was for sale, and then in March of this year they announced who the buyer was going to be. So that's it's a 9-month process. Like obviously with like Robert Sarver and selling the Suns, that was a little bit of a different thing because there was the investigation into some of the racism stuff, and they were trying to push him out as quickly as possible. So like that's a little bit of a different thing. For something like this, I think the earliest that we could possibly see them announce a buyer is around the All-Star break, which is 9 months from now, or maybe more likely at the Board of Governors meeting in March or April. Because remember, they could announce tomorrow that they have a buyer and they know who the buyer is and they have the sale agreement and that's in place. And then there's a whole process where then it has to get approved by the Board of Governors. The Celtics sale is still not finalized, by the way. They still haven't approved a new buyer through the Board of Governors. That's a whole process. It has to pass a 3/4 majority vote. So I think it'll be between 9 months and a year before that stuff is all settled for the Blazers. So at least for the next year, and from what I've heard, like I was just in Chicago for the Combine and I talked to a bunch of Blazers front office folks, and they all told me that after they announced the team was for sale, ownership said, right now just everything is business as usual. Everything, just keep doing what you're doing. No limitations on spending or roster or staffing or any of that kind of stuff. Like for right now, just kind of stay the course. So the next year should be pretty status quo as far as what the Blazers are going to be able to do or, what the plans are going to be. But once they have a new owner in place, who knows? All bets could be off, or a new owner could come in and say, yeah, this is fine. Let's keep this going.
So the Celtics, they're coming up now on month 11 since the sale was announced that they were going to sell the team. And I guess like around 9 months-ish, I want to say it was when it was announced that there's a buyer. So we're still, it looks like we might be like a year plus before it gets finalized. So like
I'm not expecting it to get done like this. And they said the team, the estate, when the Paul Allen estate put out the official press release that they were selling a team, they said that the announcement was expected, or that the sale process was expected to continue into the 25-26 season, which is where kind of that 9 to 12 month timeline is. I'm kind of getting that.
No, that makes sense. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Cronin will probably still be running the Blazers for the next year, and hopefully like another plus after that, as in like have full authority.
Right.
That's what I mean. And then
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see after that. We'll see if there's going to be any changes or any other influences. So yeah, but that's good though. Like at least for the next year plus, they can see this through. Because after
Yeah.
that, they'll have the team maybe 90, 95, maybe 100%, the core 100%
Yeah.
complete. In which case,
Yeah.
the hard part is done. But Sean, I think we covered just about everything about the Blazers' upcoming off season. No, I appreciate you for joining. Do you got anything coming up that we should be on the lookout for?
Not really, just not anything in particular. Just, rosegardenreport.com. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're a paid subscriber. That's where you're going to get all the content. We're covering, obviously right now we're kind of in the thick of the pre-draft process. I believe they're going to start pre-draft workouts at their facility next week, and they're going to start bringing guys in, and that's when you can usually get a good idea of who they might be looking at, or how some of these meetings go, some of these workouts go. So I'm going to be covering all of that. I'm obviously going to be continuing to cover this sale process as it unfolds, which is going to be a big thing over the next year. Portland next year, a year from now, Portland's WNBA expansion team is starting up, and that's something I'm also going to be covering heavily when it happens. And in the meantime, there's going to be stuff to cover with that, as far as they got to announce a name at some point. They got to hire a GM. They got to kind of start the process of getting that team up and running. They've already done some of that. They've got a new practice facility that they broke ground on. So if that's something you're interested in, I'm also going to be covering that pretty extensively. So just make sure you go and you're subscribed. That's kind of all I got to say as far as that.
All right, everyone, subscribe to the Rose Garden Report, and make sure you're following Sean on Twitter and Blue Sky at Highkin. And everyone, make sure you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky as well on my name, Yossi Goslin. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And make sure you subscribe to Third Apron. I'm eventually going to do a more deeper analysis on the Blazers offseason. I'll get more into like the cap stuff, like what a Sharpe extension could look like. There are a lot of guys extension eligible, Aiden, Simons, Rob Williams. I'll touch on all those guys. I'll get into the nitty gritty there, and check the link in the description about a sports business classroom. I'll be an instructor there, and I've got a promo code going on for those who want to sign up. I'll see you guys probably early next week.